So, good morning, Louise. How are you?
Hey, I'm good. How are you doing?
So, it seems like a very long time since we did a podcast, and that's because it's quite a long time since we did a podcast.
Indeed, it has. I don't know where the time has gone. So much for trying to do one
No.
every month.
Yeah, maybe one every year.
Maybe. Let's see what happens.
Yeah. So, in the last one, we were talking about garden waste permits and lots of other things around garden waste permits. And I think since then, we've both been out and about in the real world talking to councils about their plans for garden waste.
Yep. We've done a lot of events this year. We've been very
We have
present.
done a lot of things. There in the moment.
Yeah.
Yes, and lots of councils are still making that move towards. Well, we talk about paid for garden waste services as if that is the only thing that changes. Yeah, paying for the service is part of it, but revamping it and modernising it, and generally making waste better uh, should be part of that. And that's what we talk a lot about, isn't it?
Yeah. No, exactly that. And I think, besides the consultation and the waiting for that announcement, you're right. Councils are making decisions, and we've had six go live still with chargeable, but there are many other things to consider with making it um, a more profitable service, I guess, whether you charge or if it's free of charge.
Yeah, I find that councils are still on this journey from the good old days of when they had a pot of money and would deliver the best services they could with that pot of money to now the new world where there just isn't enough money, so they have to generate revenue from places to fill in the gaps. Um, I think you and I sit as private sector capitalist fat cats trying to make as much money as we possibly can, and we are in that culture of understanding the value of our product and selling it at that value. And I don't think that's necessarily where councils are at yet. I talk to councils in the early stages of their planning. I'm talking to a few at the moment who are looking at, how are we going to change the garden waste service? And I'm struck that the instinct is always to look at what's happening next door in the next door council. What do they charge? What do they do? Um, rather than necessarily asking residents, well, what do you want? What would work for you? What are we not providing at the moment that you would like us to provide? And then from there, figuring out what that's worth and selling it at that value. There's obviously a political reality that politicians have to set a price that is going to work for the public and work for them as politicians.
Which is what I think is going to be the outcome of the announcement. Will be, I mean, it's highly likely that they're just going to cap it. We've just done a recent case study, and it used to be £44 UK average, and it's now sitting at about 55 UK average. I've taken out the one that's 96 quid because that threw it. So we took that one out and then made an average of everyone else. And that's considering all those that do chargeable additional bins as well. So I think you're right, and everyone does go to their neighbouring councils. And I think actually to go to councils that are maybe just other councils and talking gives you a good indication as well. It's not necessarily your neighbouring council is doing everything right and making it profitable or got all the answers. I think looking at, I was speaking to someone yesterday, and they're wanting to make changes. And I said, well, why don't you speak to this council? Because this one actually did those changes. And they're the ones to talk to, aren't they? Not necessarily next door.
I think councils also need to look at whether one size fits their entire borough. Because if you've got a town centre where there's not a lot of space for bins in the first place, and the gardens tend to be smaller, well, that's not universal. And compare that to what you might need in a rural part of your collection area, the things can be very different. So providing a single service is not necessarily going to be the best fit to get the best participation and the best sort of financial outcome from the process. So I think it's important to actually start with what residents need.
Yeah. And what they need and what they expect, I guess, because they do get sensitive when they hear the words that they're going to be charged for garden services. But again, recent case study, it it's actually the norm now against all councils in the UK to be charging. The statistics are much higher than what I thought. It was a really small percentage, and now it's pushing. I think 288 councils in the UK now charge for garden waste. But overall, they will probably get a much better service if everything's considered and it's charged for. Um, and finding out exactly what they want for that money, you know.
I think that's the important distinction to make. We're not simply just charging you for the service you've already had for free.
Yeah,
Um, we have to make the argument that it was never free in the first place. It was being paid for somehow.
yeah, of course.
Um, but aside from that, if you are now charging for that service and you um, invest in providing the service that customers want, then you should be able to provide a much better service. And we've recently done systems where actually the retention rate has been phenomenal. People have moved from sack to containers. They like this so much better. We've got one council that's actually got over a 100% retention rate. More people are using the service paid for than were using it when it was free because it works for them. So I think this all speaks to going back to the resident view and saying a resident who's just mowed their lawn or has just done some work in their garden and therefore has produced some garden waste. What do they actually want, and what would they be willing to pay for? And I think it's usually quite surprising what value people place on things. We know that if you mess about with someone's bin service, they get quite vocal about that. But that is because they care about it, and that actually speaks to them wanting to actually have a good service and be willing to pay for it. And I think that's what I've seen in garden waste services. There is a natural reticence within waste departments to charge a lot for the service because it's been free. But the general feedback is that it's not that price sensitive, or at least it's not as price sensitive as people might think it is. Particularly if you can make the service fit the particular circumstances. So someone who's living in a large house with a large garden, potentially more disposable income, and potentially a much bigger garden waste problem will be willing to pay more for it than someone who's got a very small amount of garden waste, in a different area. So if you can make your service flexible, then you can cater for both of those things and get the best out of it. And that's, of course, where our technology comes in to be able to really provide a service that people can use, which isn't difficult to understand, isn't difficult to sign up for.
And it keeps the administrative burden down, let's face it. I mean, bringing technology in will only help with that. I've seen it, and it just general resident queries, and I think a lot of those are answered by having a QR code and having more communication to the residents. All of those things will help with eliminating additional costs that aren't even necessarily put anywhere at the moment. Those things aren't added. They're known about, but not properly.
Yeah, this is a common theme that we see where the council have invested in that first year, that transition period. So there's a really good sign up process. There's a nice slick payment process through the website. But actually, in year two, when it's an embedded service and everybody's kind of lost interest in it from a political perspective, that's when you get the renewals. That's when you get people who are moving house. They're moving into the borough. They're moving out of the borough. They want to change from a large bin to a small bin or have an extra bin. You have someone who signs up, but actually their partner's already renewed. All of these complications that were never actually part of the scope for the initial transition then cripple the service with all this administrative stuff. And that's where you get, the spreadsheet culture suddenly flourishes because I've got a list of this and a list of that. And it just causes a massive drag. And that also then becomes very visible to the resident who had, quite a nice sign up experience when we first wanted 40 quid off them. But actually, the second time around, as soon as something goes a little bit off piste, then it suddenly becomes very clearly a very heavy manual process, and that's visible to the resident. It's not slick. It's not a nice process, and it isn't like buying from John Lewis or buying from Amazon. The service just isn't nicely put together, and the duck on the water suddenly flips over, and you can see all the stuff that's going on underneath.
And it does take that year or even two sometimes to realise the problems, because then you don't know what bins are out there. Like you say, people move in, people steal the bins, and you end up with Mrs. Smith with 3 bins because 2 people have moved, and you just lose all traceability, and it happens all the time. It is an administrative burden, and that second, third year, that's when you're going to lose revenue. Our council has actually stopped sign-offs. There's a waiting list now because they can't manage it.
It is very dispiriting when you see a council that has stopped taking orders, stopped taking subscriptions,
Correct.
simply because they can't cope with it. There are many reasons why that could happen. It could be, an inability to get hold of the containers. It could be that they don't have the crews to be able to deliver the containers. It could be that the back office systems are not able to cope with, what's the level of demand. It could be that they can't get the crews to be able to expand the collection area. But all of those things are technological failures because you haven't invested in the service right up front to get it right. And it's potentially a symbol that you've set your pricing too low, or maybe a symbol that you've actually got a lot of your process right and you've got an attractive, easy to sign up for service, and suddenly you can't deliver it. I know you've done some research on the actual the pricing across several councils to sort of get a feel for what is the norm. And as you say, a lot of councils use that as their starting point for what they should charge for service. What is the going market rate? Um, I'd be interested to know what you sort of see the figures are, because some councils say to me, we're looking at £30. Some say we've got some clients that are doing £70. There's quite a wide variety.
There really is. It ranges from 25 to 96.
Right.
But again, you have to balance it out because some offer weekly, some offer fortnightly, some offer monthly, some only charge for additional bins. As I'd say, I took up the 96 one, so that brought it down to, I think it's 55. It's sitting at average. So it's gone up by a tenner over the last 3 years. And that's surprising. I would have thought it would have gone up by more. Yeah, 288 councils charging garden waste now in some degree. So that figure, I think, probably could go up a little bit more, if I'm honest, because of those that are just charging for additional.
Yeah.
Interestingly, the other thing we found out was it used to be that the sign-up rate was about 35%. From an audit of 76, the average is sitting at 44.
Right.
The sign-up rate is definitely going up, and the prices aren't going down.
No, and you have to dig into that sign-up rate a little bit as well, because if you look at an entire council that maybe has 100,000 premises, a good number of those in a lot of councils would not be eligible for the service anyway. They're in a fifth floor flat, or they're in terrace houses with no gardens. So actually, that 44% is 44% of a number that couldn't have the service anyway. So they would have been included as having the service even when they didn't have a bin, when it was universal. But the sign-up rate is probably, of the ones who can have garden waste or do produce garden waste, it'll be a much higher number. And anecdotally, my gut feeling is that it's generally sort of near 70-75% of people who have gardens and produce garden waste will sign up. So it's difficult to actually unpick those numbers sometimes.
Yeah, I was really surprised at the figure going up. There was a council I spoke to recently. This is what triggered this case study, really. And they said, we've had a 60% sign-up rate. And I was like, wow, that's like, I only know of one other council that had that kind of figure. And that was in slap bang in the middle of COVID. They decided to go live still, and everyone else was suspending services. They went, no, we're going to do it and we're going to collect. I mean, fair play to them. They did amazingly. But that was the only time. And then I was like, hang on a minute, I wonder if this is the new norm then, that 60% is actually higher. And maybe the COVID has now after has got people realising they don't want to go to the centre as much. They want to have the ease of having it collected and see a value in that.
I think you and I are always looking at how can councils make it really easy for people to sign up at that point where they've just put the lawnmower away, or they're just about to trim that tree, and they've got the waste in front of them. how we market that service, how we make it accessible to residents to say, yes, I want to sign up for this. Um, I look at the things that get in the way. So the things that get in the way are, well, you've got to fill in a form, you've got to sit at your PC, you've got to send in a letter, you've got to write a check. So those are things that get in the way. The other things that get in the way is if you start to sign up for a service, then, well, what day are they going to come? What bin am I going to get? Or, it's going to be 6 weeks before I actually get the service started. Or, the service is just suspended because we can't cope with it. These are all things that get in the way once you've got
And
somebody who's
add
there
to
with a
that
problem and their credit
administrative
card.
burden we were talking
Yeah,
about
yeah,
earlier.
yeah.
That's why I always encourage people to get 2 or 3 members of staff in that first 6 weeks, is because that's what they query. When's my first collection going to be? Are you going to collect? What can I put in it? Loads of questions come up. The trees behind me are owned by you. What happens
Mm,
with those? I mean,
yes.
I worked actually at a call centre for a particular council when they first went live, only because I was trying to learn. And I said, look, can I come up just to listen to the sort of queries that come up just so I can gain knowledge? I ended up taking calls because of the amount of calls that came in. And I was just absolutely baffled. And one of the things that they learned from that was the communication comms on that. I mean, that was a time before the QR code, obviously,
Mm.
that wasn't used as much, whereas now it's just like everyday life, isn't it?
Yeah, I think building in, simple services that people can sign up to on their phone. They can sign up with Apple Pay rather than having to get their credit card out. You can tell them right there and then, if you sign up for this today, we will collect your bin tomorrow. There is no earthly reason why that cannot be done. Particularly if it's a service where they've existing bins in place. Sign up today. We can collect your bin tomorrow. That should be possible, and it is possible. These are reasons why people buy. People buy from Amazon because they talk about a book in the pub, and they can whip their phone out and they can buy the book there and then, and it's there in 2 hours. In the days where you talked about a book in the pub and then the next day you had to get on the bus and go into the shop and look for it in the shop, people didn't bother because they'd got over it by this. By the time they finished their pint, they'd moved on to something else. So getting that sort of, not quite an impulse purchase, but that need to fulfill the need right now, move on and get on with your life. That is what
And
we
just
need to
make
provide.
it, like you say, make it an easy journey for them.
Yes,
And also make it an easy journey for the council. Like,
yes,
this is always the poison chalice within councils. Oh, you've got to sort out garden waste. There's a
yes,
reason why it's a poison chalice, it's because it normally comes with problems because it hasn't
yeah,
been necessarily looked at in the first few years. And it comes to them at year 2, 3 with all these issues, and that poor person's got
mm,
to deal with it.
yes.
And a lot of those could be sorted out very, very quickly with the right systems and processes in place.
If you build your service with some ambition to actually have, to meet those standards of being able to start your service immediately, to be able to pay online through your phone in a single transaction, to not have a form. In doing that, you build services, that underpin that, within your council, that actually make all of the other stuff simple. The renewals. We've just done renewals for a council with 22,000 garden waste services, and there's no paper. You've got a very few people around the edge who you have to write to who have refused to sign up online, but they are a small percentage. So
Yeah, really
actually,
smart.
20,000 just happens electronically. An email goes to tell them that we're going to take a recurring credit card payment, and 6 weeks later, the payment is taken. The ones that fail, they get an electronic message to say, your payment failed, click this button here, put in your card details. And it all just happens. And the council is sat there watching this on a dashboard. They've got a very small number of people actually having to deal with the stuff around the edges. Uh, and gradually you're educating those people who have to go through the manual process around the edges that this is just easier if you press that button and do it
Mm.
online. And I think that is happening more and more. And as well as making the service better, as well as making it more modern, you do get rid of all of that baggage of having to do things manually. And if you're not ambitious and you don't set up your service with that stuff in mind, you will always have that baggage of renewals, of people moving in and out that make it difficult. What's interesting for me is that some of the more advanced authorities that we work with are actually now looking at more forward thinking things. They are thinking much more like an Amazon I was speaking to a council the other day who want to put in a referral scheme. So we're looking at technology now within our app to say, how can we do a referral? So that is going to incentivize me to talk to my neighbour and say, hey, you should get a paid for gardening service. I'll get a little bit out of that. They'll get a little bit out of it. And it actually starts to chip away at the harder to reach, the less enthusiastic customers who haven't signed up in that first wave.
Mm.
You start to go a bit deeper, and they've got the platform to do it. They've got the electronic records of all the people who sign up. They've got an online scheme. So it's actually fairly simple to build on. And all these services are out there. There's the MailChimps and the Survey Monkeys of this world that, you can just add those services on quite simply to understand a bit more about what your customers want. So what would be your top 3 things that you can offer your residents as part of a garden service to add the perceived value? Not just we've taken the bin away or we've taken the waste away. What can you add into residents that make them think, oh, I'm glad I paid 50 quid for that service?
I think consistency. As a resident, I would want consistency. I'd want my bin collected, and I'd want to and I'd want to see that those people that are around me are also paying for that service and not just having their bins collected. I think that would definitely add value. And I'd like to have it easy so that I knew what was going on with that service. So this is why I really like the QR code on the bin. And the reason why I liked that was because I didn't know when to put my bin out one day, and I just copied the neighbours. And I did think to myself, one day, shall I put out the wrong bin and see who copies me? I haven't yet done that. But to have that QR code, I can scan that and go, right, my next collection is going to be on such and such, or it's next Wednesday. I like having that in front of me. I don't want to search for a website. I don't want to,
No.
phone up the council and be on hold. What else?
Shall I say what I want?
Go on, say what you want then.
Well, I've got a big privet hedge, so I tend to about half fill my garden bin, fortnight on fortnight. When I cut the privet hedge, it fills about 3 garden bins worth, and that's all in one go. So my privet hedge is in 3 stages every fortnight of being neatly clipped. Then there's a bit that's quite long, and then there's a bit that's not quite as long because I have to do it in sections, or I have to pile up the waste behind the gate and then feed it into the bin. What I would really like, because I'm a lazy sod, I would actually like to be able to go online and say, I would like an extra collection. And I will pay for that, because the alternative is I'm going to either store it in the garden and have my wife moaning at me that the garden's full of clippings, or I'm going to put it in my car, get my car full of clippings and muck, and drive it somewhere into the local HVC, and then manhandle it all out again. I don't want to do that. I want to give you a
Okay,
tenner and come and pick
if
it up.
so, your council currently does fortnightly,
It's fortnightly and it's free.
right? Okay, so if they were chargeable and you're charging fortnightly, and you then had your bin full,
Yeah.
that would be an amazing service to add.
Well, I
To be
could
able
either.
to just click and go, can you collect this week as well?
Yeah, I would either
But
want
then
to
how many
pay.
people would have to do that to warrant it?
Well, the technology is relatively straightforward. So the first thing I could do is I could buy a second bin, which would be the simplest thing to do. So I've just doubled the capacity, which I've paid for, and I'll be happy to pay for that. The second alternative, and this might very much depend on where you live, but to say I need an additional collection, the system can then tell you what is available. And this is coming on to something that I bang on about with bulky waste collections quite a lot. We tend to divide boroughs up into days when we go and deliver the bulky waste service, which in a rural area makes perfect sense. You don't want to be going into that area day in day out for orders of sorts of collections. But we also do that for the premises that live right next to the council waste depot, where the trucks are driving past every single day, but Thursday's your bulky waste day. So if I happen to live near the depot, and I do live fairly near the depot, then actually there are several days of the week that you could come and get my bin as an extra collection. But
Okay.
the,
So
the,
all that
the
information would be readily available, I guess, on the route
it's
that you.
well, we know where the trucks are, we know where I am, we know what it is I need picking up. So the technology can do that. I think 50% of the council I would talk about would say, well, if we did that, it would just be too expensive. And I might admit, actually, is who's deciding that? You know, figure out how much it's going to cost to send an RCV to my house tomorrow, and tell me that's the price, and I can choose. So actually, make it possible, and it might be that it's 80 quid for a collection, and it might be that someone will pay for that. It might be that people won't, but deciding us as people won't pay for that. I think councils in particular, are very pessimistic about what people will pay for a good service.
Yeah, I agree. I have to say I do agree. I mean, I
So,
get frustrated because I would love a garden bin. In fact, we want a shared one because they won't take subscriptions, and we're like, at least one between us we could, have. But no, there's no option to have it. And we'd be happy to pay. I'd be happy to pay more if that's what they said, because we could share it.
yeah,
Um, but it's very frustrating to not have that option. I can't get a free, and I
yeah,
can't get a paid.
yeah. You
So
can,
what are the chances?
yeah, you can go into a restaurant with your friends and split the bill 5 ways through your credit card app really, really easily,
Yeah,
but you can't do that for a bin.
yeah,
Why not? Why can't we have a subscription and just pay half each? What
yeah.
the technology exists. It's easy, but and in
You
a
could have it capped, couldn't you? You could have it capped to like 2 properties or 3 properties, so you're still
yeah,
getting your value. But equally, like I wouldn't be able to fill a bin. So then you're in the realms of actually you're collecting a bin that's like a quarter full. Like
yeah,
that's pointless as well. Surely it's better to have less bins with
yes,
more weight in them. So
yeah,
then give people an opportunity to do that. But I don't have any. We have to take garden waste to the centre ourselves because there's no other option. There's no
mm,
service at all at the moment apart from historic people who are paying for it, and you've got to go on a waiting list or go to the tip. Um, so we can't be the only ones. And
no.
they're only adding more properties, so God knows what the solution is.
Well, one of the other common arguments against garden waste services and food waste services and all the new services that are coming along is that um, you know you end up with a lot of bins at premises. There's this talk of people are going to have 7 bins, which is, I don't believe, is remotely true. But we have that bin fear of we're going to have all these bins. There's a thing in the news today from Milton Keynes about the wheelie bin shanty town, which is a great phrase coined there. Um, so yes, if you've got a small garden and limited space for bins, it makes sense to either promote your own communal bin system where there's a garden bin at the street level, but then you've got to push that on people. If you can let people just form their own little collectives and pay for a bin between themselves, why not?
Or have a pay and collect. So you give a bin to that person. It's up to me if I've got room for it or not, and
Yeah,
then I can pay per collect. So I
yes,
could go online, go right. I need a collection this next time you're around because it's full now.
yeah,
And then I don't have to pay for a subscription because it's not full. I don't have it enough, and do it like that, like a click and collect, I guess.
yeah. Well, why not?
Clip and collect. Oh no, someone's done that, haven't they? There's a council that called it that, isn't there? Clip and collect
Fairham
for the
councils.
fair. I
Yeah,
knew it was someone. I thought that was
yeah,
marketing genius.
yeah. It's a very good
Um,
one. Particularly as they launched it during the sort of COVID times and everybody was doing click and collect. So yeah, clip and collect was a really
genius.
good one.
Clip and
Yeah,
collect. I love it.
yeah,
Um, I knew I'd heard it from somewhere.
yeah. And actually, these are the small things that make a difference when you put in these online services. So yeah, clip and collect. It's a snazzy little thing, really good for marketing. And they are the council that had over 100% take up rate. So they got that right. So yeah, those little things are all important. And again, in the retail world, businesses spend a lot of time and effort into coming up with the right names and making sure that their service is accessible to people. People whose first language might not be English, but people who are not natural computer users. So coming up with something really short and snappy and simple and catchy is important.
I
Um,
think just treating it like a sales opportunity.
yes, we're trying to sell
Stop
you something.
treating it like the poison chalice and go, this
Yeah,
is money. This is a sales. This is a company in itself. This is going to
yeah,
be a revenue generator. Let's treat it like that. Give it the name
yeah,
it deserves. Make it easy. Let's get people on board. And also, just obviously, we're in sales. Okay, we. But it's very frustrating when councils could talk to us even about what is available. I think that they don't often know what's available. So they've got all these problems and they're keeping them to themselves or talking amongst themselves about it. But they're actually not necessarily talking to people out there that have got products and services that are actually built around those problems. And there are things that exist. And you're sitting there with this problem, and there are things that exist that would fix that, but they sometimes don't want to discuss this with companies because they think it's going to be the hard sell. But you and I definitely don't do that. We're here to help the council and really promote a good service to help both of us, and get your revenue up and use a service that's going to save you money ultimately.
I do find that in most of the discussions I'm having these days with authorities, and increasingly I'm having discussions sort of even ahead of a political decision being made to go for a paid service. It's more and more at the preparatory stages where we're talking to the waste department. And my message is usually to say, first of all, ask the politicians what it is that you want to achieve. If this is to break even, then build a service that breaks even. But if it's to generate revenue, ask them how much revenue they want to generate. What are we doing here? Are we going all out for maximum profit? Are we actually going out for a mixture of really good participation and profit? So ask those questions of the politicians, because without that, you're building a business without knowing what it is it's supposed to produce. So that's the first thing. And the second thing is, just think about this from the point of view of a buyer, a user of the service, who has no idea how councils work and doesn't care how councils work. They've got a pile of grass clippings that they want rid of. How would any other service fix that problem for them? It wouldn't ask them to go on a website and then start clicking through lots of different things. It wouldn't ask them to fill in a form. It would actually advertise a solution. Back that up with some advertising in your council tax renewal. Put a leaflet in there. Put something on the local radio. Put stuff on lampposts. Put it on the side of your bin trucks. You can brand your bin trucks up with advertising really easily. But you've got to have a really simple, snappy message. What I would say is you have to sustain that marketing effort beyond the first year.
Well, no other company works like that, does it? Okay, year one, we'll do a bit of advertising. Okay, we've got that now. We won't bother with anything else. Let's just see how that works.
This is now an annual recurring subscription. So, yes, once you get people signed up, they tend to stay. But you're charging them every year. So you need them every single year to keep paying you the money. So we've come to that part of the podcast where we need an ending.
We do. So how do we sign off?
I don't know. It's like that bit in Friends. You hang up. No, you hang up.
Click. I don't know how other people end podcasts. Maybe I should listen to a few more podcasts and see how they end them.
I think other people end their podcast by thanking their guests, and we don't have any guests, so we have to thank each other.
Okay, thank you, Tim, for your input today.
And thank you, Louise, and thank you to our many millions of listeners.
Just millions.
Yes, just millions. So thank you to all our listeners for bearing with us. And we will be back in
a month to a year.
Anywhere between a month and a year with another episode of this riveting podcast.
And we'll try and make sure our ending is better in future.
Cue the music. See you next time, Louise. Say bye then.
Bye.